Hello and welcome to today's edition of Hess World The Podcast. I'm delighted to have as my guest today, Steve Howe. Hello, Steve. Welcome.
Hi, Martin. Thank you for having me.
I've known Steve for many, many years. I met Steve at HP. We found out, by the way, recently, we were both joined ICL, that Blast from the Past. We both joined as part of the same graduate intake, but we got to know each other at HP. Steve rose to the dizzy heights of heading up services sales globally for HP. But we were colleagues on the UK board for many years and swapped stories as we went along. And I've kept in touch with Steve, and Steve's now doing some very interesting work in the area of resilience and how that is needed to basically deal with stress. So what we're going to talk about today is that. We're going to talk a bit about Steve's background, his views on leadership, his views on values that are very important to him in business. We're going to talk about that very important subject of resilience. And we're also going to talk about a subject I don't think I've covered much in previous podcasts, which for those of us, well, as I say, for those of you in your sort of late 40s into your 50s, thinking about how you actually move from that corporate world into a post-corporate world, and both of us have done it, and we're going to talk a bit about how we've done it, any lessons learned there, and hopefully it will be an hour really well spent by you in listening and watching into it. So thank you for tuning in. So once again, welcome, Steve.
Thank you, Martin.
Let's very brief bit about, where you grew up and how you got into IT.
Okay. So, as some of your viewers who may know me, I have a passion for soccer, a team that's not massively fashionable, Stoke City. And that really derived from the fact that between the ages of 4 and 11, I was brought up in the Potteries in Stoke-on-Trent. Fairly normal childhood, but was, I have to say, disappointed at the age of 11 when my father announced we were moving south.
Okay.
I had to leave a lot of friends, etc. So moved south, went to a grammar school, did my GCSEs, A-levels, and ended up going to Leeds University, studying a subject that is my passion, geography. Not much use in the corporate world, mind you. And from there, like a lot of people in that area, through the milk round, applied to various companies and was offered a role either at Barclays or ICL. And my thought process was, rightly or wrongly, banking, sounds a bit boring. Technology, it could catch on. Because back in 82, it wasn't a massive thing.
It was called computers.
It was called computers. In fact, computers occupied very large rooms in those days.
Yeah.
So that was my sort of career choice. And 35 years on, I stayed in the tech sector throughout my career.
Did you know what a computer was back then? Because I went in, I'm a little bit older than you, but I went into computers, IT, as I think it had just been christened, but I had to learn what the hell it was.
Well, the good news was that in that graduate course that you and I both went on in different cohorts, we kind of got a sort of immersion in all things IT. What was storage, software, etc. I even had to do some assembler programming, which I wasn't great at, let's put it that way. I had a little bit of help with from a young lady who subsequently I married. Not because of that, by the way.
You married her because she was a good assembler programmer. Well, yeah, I must admit, I married my wife because she was bloody good looking, but,
exactly.
Each to their own.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. So did you sort of venture into the world of hexadecimal?
Yeah, I'd have to go back and look up what that means now, Martin. But yes, I did. And it was a world I sort of withdrew from very quickly.
Yeah, I think we were, I don't want to overly praise ourselves, but we were sort of, people didn't have careers in computers. It was sort of new. It was slightly pioneering stuff. I remember having to, all my mates from university went off to join city accounting firms, and that's oh God,
Exactly.
But we probably underestimated the attraction of banking, actually. But but I, we call it tech these days. But computers back then was really left field stuff, wasn't it? It was
Totally.
yeah.
And if you look back, it was before the days of, the PC, the personal computer.
Yeah, I think I joined the industry a year before it was launched.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
Yeah.
And if you think back, those mainframes in those days had less power than you have on your mobile phone now.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
But they cost a bloody fortune, and the commission we got from it was great.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Long live the mainframe.
Yes, long live the mainframe. So much so that you didn't have to work for half the week, did you, or half the year?
True.
True. So you joined ICL, and in like all of us, we sort of went via a technical role. Did you hate that technical role as much as I did?
I hated it so much, Martin, that after a number of months of trying to persuade my manager in our local office that where I really wanted to be was in the kind of sales marketing environment. I guess a little hot-headed in my youth, without a job to go to, 9 months in, I walked out, said, it's not for me. What I wanted to do was to see if I could sell, and I didn't want to wait 2 years to find out.
Yeah, interesting. Impatient. It wasn't about. I don't think this computer thing will catch on. It was nothing to do with that. It was more of a, Why did you think selling was the right thing for you, though? I mean,
well, I'd spent a couple of months with the sales team in Southampton, and the idea of, building the relationships, bit of the thrill of the chase, in a new business sense. I was with a new business team. I kind of liked the look of the lifestyle, if I'm totally honest, as well. And I thought it was something I'd be good at. And I really didn't want to wait a couple of years to find out.
Yeah, probably the same reasons I was attracted to it. And I know you and I have done some personality profiling around something called the Enneagram.
Yeah.
And we're both Enneagram 7. So anybody out there who knows the Enneagram, we're both social 7s. And I think we have a thirst for freedom and independence and variety, don't we?
100%.
Which was that was one of the attractions for me into sales, being my own boss. I like the idea of having a target. I like the idea, and I've always been. I've never been totally coin operated, but the idea of making a few quid was an attraction. So I assume the same went for you.
Absolutely, not the be all and end all, the financial side, but it was definitely a factor for sure.
And you got your company car?
Yeah, got my company car, got my
What was your
sales
first company
territory.
car?
It was a Vauxhall Cavalier. Can you imagine? Yeah. Brand new.
Yeah, that they were so cool at the time, weren't they?
They were.
What was the top of the range? Was it
the SRI?
The SRI, yeah.
I never got an SRI, Martin, and maybe
they were really
they're
flash.
still available. I don't know.
What about the Ford Capri? That was quite cool as well, but that was never available to us sales reps, was it?
Sales managers, you could get hold of a Capri on our scheme, but not the Cavalier, unfortunately.
So tell me how you went from a seller. What was your first selling job then? Was that?
So when I left ICL without a job, I basically picked up the Evening Standard. In those days, the Evening Standard had 30 pages at the back full of jobs. And I thought, what is the most difficult sales job that I could find? Because if I could be successful at that, I could be successful anywhere. And in those days, you probably remember, Martin, it was office equipment.
Yeah.
Nobody wants an office equipment sales rep knocking on their door.
Yeah.
So I joined a company. They gave me the territory. They gave me 1-day training. They gave me a catalogue of what we had to sell. And off I went. And that was really the start, hard nose, knocking on doors, getting thrown out of industrial estates.
Bugger off.
Yeah, absolutely. But it was a numbers game.
Yeah.
1 in 20 would perhaps let me through the door. And I worked out quite quickly that actually, instead of selling, 10 boxes of photocopying paper on that visit, what if I sold them a year's worth and then I wouldn't have to keep going back? And so what I worked out very quickly is my sort of 5-day week became a 3-day week because I'd done most of my business in the first 3 days of the week.
So you were the herald of annuity contracts, multi-year managed services contract, and arguably the SaaS model.
Maybe.
It started with you, Steve. Yeah, well, that's interesting, you see, because most of the sellers I sort of worked with back in those days, they never worked Fridays. They were down the pub or playing golf. Because, but I suppose, it was those were the glory days in many respects, weren't they? So take me from there through to HP. What happened in between?
Well, essentially, selling office equipment, I could do. I stayed there for a couple of years, but really what I wanted to do was be back in IT. And so with the advent of the PC, I thought, what if I combine my sales experience now selling back into the IT profession, back into the IT sector. So I ended up working for a reseller in the city, just down the road in Moorgate, selling IBM PCs, XTs, ATs to all of these big investment banks who up until that point had been using Wang word processors.
Yeah.
And from there, essentially, I moved up to selling mid-range systems with software in the legal profession. And in those days, the kind of pinnacle of sales was selling IBM mainframe.
There was a hierarchy, wasn't there?
Definitely.
From sort of, word processors through PCs, through what were called mini computers, but, through to the mainframe. It's weird, isn't it? There was definitely that hierarchy.
Exactly. So I started in a company. They were Cap Group. They then became acquired by Sema Group, a system integrator. And basically, my role was to sell retail banking software, card payment software to banks in the UK.
Yeah.
And I was there for about 13, 14 years, rose through sales management, sales director, ended up being responsible globally for their payment systems business.
Wow.
And it was that then, if you like, was the springboard into HP. And I wasn't dissatisfied at Sema Group. I just needed a new
Why
challenge.
HP? Because I was acquired by HP when I was at Compaq. I'm not sure I would have.
Of course,
I'm not sure I'd ever have applied to HP because it did. I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Once I was acquired, but it was always it never quite had that sort of dynamic thrusting image that I probably would have looked for if I'd applied from another job. So why was HP so attractive to you?
Yeah, I guess I was quite strategic in my thinking of where next. And the where next, the main criteria was finding an organization that could satisfy my career aspirations for the rest of my corporate career. Because at the time, HP operated in a number of different areas.
So what year was this? Where are we now?
2006, 2007, around that period. Yeah. In those days, HP was very well known for PCs, printers, servers, storage, networking, and had a fledgling outsourcing business.
But it was small.
It was small. And I was invited by one of my former colleagues, somebody called Nicky Hurst, some of your viewers might remember, to actually go into HP within the outsourcing business that HP was building. And that was where it started.
Yeah, it was very much, it was a very hardware-dominated environment, wasn't it? So, and it was a fledgling services business. Was that part of the attraction then, that you could, strategic intent was to build up a services business? And
absolutely. But I guess when I went in, probably at the time, 80% plus was selling kit, selling technology. The services business was in its infancy, apart from, the maintenance support business that went with the servers. But the outsourcing business, there were some let's say, first customers, some of whom I found out actually on day one were not particularly happy with the service they were receiving.
Who are some of the people that were in that world? Was Paul Patterson in that world?
Paul was...
Martin Cordingley, I'm throwing some names
so
at.
Martin Cordingley, he was, I think, the TSG sales lead. So Martin, very well respected sales leader. Martin, classic sales leader.
Smooth operator.
Very, very good. But I was in the outsourcing business.
That was even the smaller bit of the overall services business, wasn't
Totally.
it?
Totally. And we had some contracts that I remember the night before I joined HP getting a phone call to say, Steve, we booked you on a flight to Ireland. You're going to go and take a look at one of our outsourcing clients. And I joined the account manager.
Which account was that? Was it Bank of Ireland?
It was Bank of Ireland. Yeah. And here was a classic situation. And the classic situation was that, it was 18 months into the outsource. The transformation project was 18 months elapsed, but they'd spent 95% of the transformation budget, but the progress on transformation was about 10%.
So a pretty normal outsourcing contract.
Exactly. Incredibly typical. But I found myself basically working on that for the next 3 months. And
living in Dublin.
Yeah, without going into the too much detail, we ended up renegotiating the contract because let's just say it was a huge loss-making contract.
I think you were the sort of... There must have been a bit of swagger about you in those days, because there was, just as there was a sort of a hierarchy in the world of hardware, you probably thought you were, a cut above these, boy racers for flogging product. Or am I being a bit presumptuous there?
I think I respected the product guys
because you'd come from that world.
Yeah, but a little bit of snobbery in as much as in that hierarchy. And I remember being in a session actually in the Bracknell office with salespeople from the product world and salespeople from the consulting and services world. And a question was asked. And the question was, so a client calls you and wants to order 100 servers. What's the answer? And this isn't a joke, by the way. This is actually what happened. We could make a joke out of it. But anyway, somebody from the product world says, I'd give them 30% discount and sign the order. Yeah, great job. Anyone from the consulting side, the consulting guy stands up and said, what are you going to be using it for? And this was the difference that we saw within the HP world, which is the different approach from product selling to consultative or solution selling. Because through solution selling, we could see that we could expand the opportunity far more than if we just address the immediate requirement for a bit more tin in a data center.
You see, I think, but to me, I don't think there was a right or wrong there, you see. I think
that's true.
If you're measured on selling products, frankly, I don't give a shit about your services business, and nor did they. And it was hence Compact's model, which is sell as much product through channel partners as possible, keep cost of selling it as low as possible. Whereas if you're driven by sales, you're gonna your focus is going to be different. I always try to take a non-hierarchical and snooty approach to it. I mean, the ultimate, by the way, expression of that was when EDS was bought by HP.
Phew.
And I obviously went across into the services business, which was in the UK overwhelmingly EDS dominated. But the folks from EDS, I mean, the thought of being bought by a printer company, I mean, and then they made that very clear. I mean, we don't, ink, it was like, we're far too intelligent and sophisticated to be really part of an ink company. And, to which I thought and often said, well, hang about, that's where all the money's made.
Exactly.
That is where all the money is made in printering.
Yeah.
Anyway, I digress. Now, one of the jobs that you did was running the TS organisation.
Yes.
Right,
yeah.
so if we're talking about hierarchies as well, I've always thought TS, let's be frank, one of the less glamorous parts of the portfolio, but jeepers creepers did it make money.
Absolutely.
It was a beautiful part of the business. Yeah, tell us a bit about your spell at TS, in TS.
Yeah,
that.
yeah. So I guess I'd got to the point in the outsourcing world, post-EDS acquisition, where I needed a new challenge, but also I was looking to fulfill one of my goals, which is I wanted to try and reach a VP type level. And so I applied for a couple of roles. One was VP software for the UK. One was TS.
I should jump in, actually, because I just realised a lot of people watching wouldn't know what TS is.
Yeah.
It's basically maintenance of hardware, isn't it? I mean,
I'd
in
say
layman's terms.
80% is maintenance of hardware, 20% consulting around the use of the hardware.
But it's hardware related. So for those of you
Absolutely.
that aren't familiar, apologies for using jargon you might know. It's basically support and maintenance contracts of the hardware predominantly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, I must admit, and this might be a bit of a revelation for people who perhaps worked in that organization, that when I went through the interview process, I hadn't had much exposure to TS, and I didn't really fully understand what it is that they did. So on day one, when I come into the business, this is what I found. I found a group of people who seemed to be pretty competent, but lacked a bit of confidence. I also found, whilst revenue-wise they weren't the biggest proportion of the UK business, they kind of very much punched above their weight in terms of the contribution of profit.
Yeah.
And yet almost, the feeling with TS was almost feeling apologetic for existing. So it just felt that it was tired. It felt that it needed sort of shaking up a little bit. And it felt like, without being rude to my predecessor, felt like it just needed a bit of leadership. And that was the challenge that I guess I was set, is to take TS from fairly static in terms of growth, but really drive growth and start to also look at how we could help the product business by pulling through product business on the back of our consulting services.
I think one of the problems, you just triggered in my mind with that view of that support maintenance business not being, being a little bit seen as not the place to be, is that sellers were measured on revenue, and revenue was the language that everybody spoke, unlike the world of the channel where it's margin and profit.
Absolutely.
If we'd have all been measured on profit, I think the perception of TS, of that maintenance business, would have been very, very different.
Yeah, I totally agree, Martin. But I guess from that day one, my job was really to promote the value that TS brought to the rest of the organization. So I remember having some conversations with you, Jackie Ferguson, who headed up the outsourcing business in those days. This idea of squeezing TS every time there's a big outsourcing deal, there needed to be more equity.
Because I think we thought you were making too much money. Probably.
Exactly, yeah.
But if we took a holistic view of the company level, we would have protected that.
Precisely. And I guess in terms of my leadership, I showed, I guess, the rest of our organization and team that I was prepared to sort of stand up and fight for, let's say, an equal seat at the table.
Well, you were a big figure, weren't you? You were a heavyweight in that job, and I think that was...
In more ways than one, probably, in those days, Martin.
So how did you make your difference? Tell me some of the things you did.
Yeah. So I think I said before that, some really great people in that organization. And one of the things I remembered was, in that first week, I had spoken to all of the leadership team. And I mentioned before, they just lacked a bit of leadership and purpose. And so one of the things we did very early on was take the team off site, and we collectively created a vision of what the future should look like. It was a 2 to 3 year plan, which was highly based on kind of visualization. And this may connect to something else we might talk about. But I remember very early on talking about, this year's target is all about getting to the top of a mountain. I think we chose Everest. Right. And so every quarter, the analogy was we're now at base camp. We're now at camp 1, camp 2, etc., until we got to the top. Not only did the leadership team buy into it, but everyone in the organization bought into it as well. But there was another critical thing that happened in the first week in my role. And I remember, I'm sure you remember Mark Armstrong.
Yeah.
Really, really
great guy. Fantastic
great guy.
Mark, hope you're well out there.
Yeah, absolutely. We must get together. But I remember very early on, I think it was the first week, end of quarter, Mark, who had only just met, came into the office and said, Steve, great news. We've just won a 5 million or whatever it was deal with, it was a competitive situation with an organization. And I said, well, this is fantastic news. Congratulations. And he said, yeah, what's more, the sales guy actually came from the incumbent supplier. So we had some, really good insight, knowledge of the service, the pricing, etc. So that sort of got me interested. To cut a very long story short, having spoken to the salesman, I decided that we'd actually won that piece of business unfairly. And so we went back to the client, very difficult call, and explained that we had to withdraw from that because essentially we'd won it, in my opinion, unethically. And so the client wasn't very happy, but respected our decision. And I remember, nor was Mark. Mark wasn't particularly happy. But I used that to demonstrate on our first all hands a few days later that I want to win, I want to be successful, but we need to do this properly.
Yeah.
We're not going to tolerate behaviors that are not aligned to ethical behavior. So in doing that, Martin, I drew my line in the sand. And I think people respected that early on. Well, most of them, maybe not all.
What did Mark think of that? Blimey.
Not massively pleased. I think he's forgiven me. I'm not sure. But yeah, it was all about doing things.
But that's you, isn't it?
Right.
That's you doing, winning business the right way, that there is there's an ethical context in which to compete and win.
Totally, Martin. Totally.
So just moving on. So you went and I guess you went from there to running services sales worldwide.
Yeah. So, well, actually, there was a little step in between. So we had 3 years of probably the greatest success I've had in my career, where when the planets aligned, we had a vision, a mission, we had a team to execute, and we had 3 years of incredible growth. And we were the fastest growing. We exceeded targets on a global basis. We were the kind of number one TS country in the world. And, if I talk to people now, and some of your listeners, I'm sure, were there during that era, I look back on that time and say it was the most enjoyable, fulfilling time of my entire career. And even now, people who are graduates in those days who are now in middle to senior management roles, they'll reflect back, through LinkedIn or whatever and say, yeah, I really enjoyed that time.
Why was that then? Why was it so enjoyable for you? What were the ingredients that made it so enjoyable?
Because we set a task. So we had a vision. We empowered, the group of leaders. I wasn't a micromanager. I empowered them.
Throw in some names of that team.
James Greenham, Mark Armstrong, Joe Beeston, David Regan.
Okay.
Real strong professionals.
Yeah.
Simon on the consulting side. Really strong people, great leaders who led their team. My job was basically to give them the time and space and the air cover to be able to take some risks.
How much of it was because you could create it was your business. You could put your own personal stamp on it. Because when I look back at my own career, a lot of my career, I always try to create Hess World where and the most satisfying jobs have been where I've been able to create enough space to put my own stamp on that particular business. Was that one of the factors that make it so, such a great experience for you?
If I'm honest, I think it was. I don't respond massively well either to micromanagement. And I had a boss, if you remember in the Matrix days, I had a UK MD boss and I had an EMEA technology services boss. And they both gave me great time and space and autonomy. I guess also because, the business was doing quite well and they had other fires to fight. But I guess we created that environment. So, if I'm honest, I could essentially do within reasonable guidelines anything to drive the success of the business. And that felt such a fulfilling moment. You don't always get that in your career.
The analogy I use, you were on your own hamster wheel rather than on somebody else's hamster wheel.
Yeah.
Because we spend a lot of time in corporate
That's
on
very
somebody
true.
else's hamster wheel, don't we?
Very true.
Run faster. And you just get used to that. But is it particularly fulfilling? Wasn't for me. I could do it. When I had a chance to do it myself and get on my own hamster wheel, I loved it.
Yeah.
Which makes me wonder why I stayed on somebody else's hamster wheel for so long. But let's not go there.
Yeah.
So actually, that leads me on
That's
to
interesting.
let's move on to you decided to leave HP, and I'd like to come back to that. I'd like to jump ahead a bit to what you're doing now, because you're focusing. You built your own business around resilience. Tell us a little bit about that, because I think there's some interesting learnings there.
Yeah. I mean, it does relate to, I guess, the reason why I left HP. And I enjoyed what I was doing at the time. I was
Big
responsible.
Job, global job.
Exactly. But if I'm honest, it was taking its toll. If I look back in those days, we used to fly all over the place all the time, and it takes its toll on health, relationships, all sorts of different things. But that wasn't the driving force for leaving. The driving force for me leaving essentially was I wanted to do something more meaningful with my life. Probably mid-50s at the time. And I couldn't see myself doing the same thing as I near retirement, whatever age that is. It gets further away, doesn't it? But I couldn't see it, at the age of 67, what was I going to be able to do with my life after that? The things that I'm passionate about. I guess I was concerned that I wouldn't have the time and space to be able to do it. And that's really the driving force for leaving the corporate world. I didn't really leave HP. I left the corporate world behind me.
Yeah.
And deciding really to have more flexibility in my work life and my home life by being my own boss and really using my experience. Sounds maybe a bit crass, but use my experience to help others, either in a leadership perspective, a development, a coaching perspective. I had no plan other than...
Well, let's talk about that now, actually.
Yeah,
let's talk about moving from corporate world to a non-corporate world. Because a lot of people wrestle with that. There are a lot of things to take into account. Yeah, what about the financial dimension? Did you think you could afford to do it?
I looked at it a different way. I thought for the other aspects of my life, I couldn't afford not to do it.
Right.
But to answer your question, financially, I was in a situation where actually having a big income was no longer necessarily number one. You know, we all like to earn some money, but it became secondary to my desire to actually do something on my own, do something, as I said earlier, much more meaningful. Now, I think I was lucky in the sense I had that choice. You know, for people who come out of the corporate world who still need to earn, you know, a decent high level of income, you know, would I have been brave enough to leave the comfort of the corporate world 8 years ago without that financial stability? I don't know.
Yeah.
I really don't know.
Yeah, we do have that luxury actually, and a lot of people don't have that luxury.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's a real toughie. How much of it was sort of driven by, you know, because you're now what, I don't know, early 60s. I'm
somewhere up there.
I'm pushing the edge of mid 60s. I'm probably a little bit north of mid 60s, but I mean, how much of it is? And I think you've touched on it already. Time's running out. I mean, you know, without wishing to too morbid about it, you know, time runs out. And as somebody once said to me, you can always have more money, but you can't always have more time.
Very true.
And how much of it was that?
If I'm honest, I think quite a significant part of it. I think, you know, throughout my corporate world, you know, growing up, getting into more responsibility, families, et cetera, you find that you lose the opportunity to do the things that perhaps you enjoy doing.
Yeah.
It's very hard to keep all those things moving. And I think I got to that point where I thought, actually, yeah, if I get to that age of 67, 68 and I retire at that point, I may not physically be able to do the things I enjoy. And my passion is actually being out in the big wide world, out in nature, hiking, going up mountains, etc., etc.
You become a bit obsessive, if I may say so, on some of those. Because whenever I bump into you, Steve, you say, "Well, look, I'm planning my walk to the North Pole," or I think you're planning your climbing of Kilimanjaro, and you've done the Camino, and So, is that a big driver of you? And this, you know, and I use the word obsessive, and I did ask for your permission to use it.
You did, yeah.
You didn't mind me. Talk to me a little bit more about that as a driver.
So first and foremost, I would say that being out in the mountains, out in nature, is my happy place. You know, whether
has it always been your happy place? So when you were, you know, flying across to Palo Alto and in endless meetings, I mean, were you yearning to sort of get out there and climb mountains?
No. In fact, I go back to my time at TS with the vision of the mountain. And what triggered it was actually a group of people in the organization saying, we love the analogy of Everest. We're not going to climb Everest. We're going to do the 3 peaks challenge, 24 hours. There's 25 of us going to do it, and we want you to do it. And I thought, oh, crikey, do I really want to do that? It ignited the passion. And the most important thing it did was it switched my lifestyle into prioritizing health and fitness.
Yeah.
And it was a real turning point.
Was that an age-related thing, do you think?
I think it could have been.
If I want to live longer, I've got to look after myself.
I think
or if I want to have a quality of life into my latter years, I need to look after my health.
I think it was more basic. Having got the bug for, you know, these long distance hikes, these, you know, climbing of mountains, having got that bug, I wanted that to last for as long as possible. It was less about mortality and much more to me about I want to experience that as often as I can and keep pushing myself to find the limits.
Very much a characteristic of your Enneagram type. And those of you who haven't got a clue what I'm talking about, look up the Enneagram. It's fantastic. So yeah, we're both the same. We're the same type. Yeah. So we're looking for constant stimulation and variety and new challenges and new opportunities. And I suppose yours are channeled that way. Mine are probably not channeled into such physical pursuits, but it's that must have always been there with you then.
I think it was. It hadn't surfaced to the extent that it's surfaced now, but it very much aligns with my work in resilience, because essentially, and I don't do it for this reason. I do it because I love it and enjoy it. But when you're doing these kind of adventures, you find out so much about yourself, and whether it's physical strength, which obviously is important, but I've been in situations where physically there's not much left in the tank. And the only thing that gets you through is the mental strength,
so tell us
the mental agility.
Let's detour into the resilience business that you're building and tell us a bit about that and what you do and why it's important to you.
Sure. Let me just put in context why did I get into that? So coming out of HP 7-8 years ago, if you looked in the workplace, levels of stress and burnout were beginning to increase. And I'd observed, people navigating challenges and stress in many, many different ways. But at the same time, and I don't think probably many of your listeners would know this because I never shared it at the time. But at the time I was running TS, and for a number of years, my son, who at the time was probably 12, 13, very much into swimming. He swam at a national level, very much into soccer, rugby, good academically, came home one day and the world was revolving, something called vestibular migraine. And I'll try and make this story short, but that condition continued for many years, which impacted his education and also, being with friends, during his teenage years. And I remember I always used to feel guilty going to work. My wife would care, for Will during those times. I always felt guilty going to work, because I felt there should be more that I could do. But the link to resilience was, I remember saying to him one day, I said, well, when he was well, he would, be homeschooled, etc. When he wasn't, he couldn't do anything. And I said, how do you keep this going? And he said, well, it's quite simple. I have this vision of me on stage at a university receiving my degree. Now, bear in mind, no GCSEs at this point, no A-levels. It was a long way ahead. But he had a strong purpose. And he became one of my inspirations for then researching the topic of resilience, to understand why some people are more resilient than others, and really to identify what can we do to help people in this world which is ever changing at a faster rate, very challenging, whether it's at work or at home. And so we researched the topic of resilience academically for 3.5, 4 years. And on one of my walks, it came to me, maybe I was a bit slow, wouldn't it be amazing if we could measure somebody's resilience? But most importantly, what if we could identify the factors associated with low resilience and target and customize coaching and training to those specific factors? And that's essentially what we did, Martin. And these days we work, with organizations and individuals where on one hand, we're trying to help people become more resilient, but on the other hand, address the root causes of stress in the workplace in the first place, which generally tend to revolve around very high workload, lack of prioritization, unrealistic deadlines, unclear roles and responsibilities, and lack of support from management. Those 5 things are the most common factors which lead to stress and burnout.
So that's just on the, and thank you for sharing that about your son Will, but phenomenal success. And I think he's ended up overcoming that and doing very well for himself, hasn't he?
Absolutely, yeah.
But great resilience from you, because I certainly didn't know about it. Nobody at HP, I think, knew about it. So you must have left that behind you on the outside anyway, even though it was obviously all on the inside.
Wow.
When you were doing your high pressure job, so that showed phenomenal resilience from your point of view.
Yeah, I think I never saw it that way, Martin, because in between meetings, etc., when I was outside of the meeting room, the only thing and the first thing that would ever come into my head was, would it be better when I get home this evening? So it was always with you. But I don't think...
You didn't wear it on your sleeve, is I suppose my point.
I didn't let it become a reason for not performing or anything else. I very much tried to separate it. Maybe I shouldn't, I don't know.
Coming back to your 5 resilience points, because I'm of the view that stress is the limiter for so many people's careers, and people can hit it at different stages. And I was very fortunate. I didn't suffer from stress, and people.
You
around
never
me,
looked stressful.
No, that's why I probably carried so much weight. No, and I remember Steve Gill. We had some problems on numbers around BCS, on our sort of Unix numbers. And I remember Pete Murray said to me, he said, Steve's just asked me, doesn't Martin care about what's going on? The numbers are a bit poor. And Pete apparently said to Steve, well, why do you say that, Steve? And he said, well, he doesn't look very stressed. And I've tried to work it out, but I've been lucky. But some people hit stress earlier in their career, and some people who don't face up to it, I think, have breakdowns.
Oh, 100%.
And those that do face up to it tend to find a job which fits their profile, that basically where they're not going to get stressed, which is, and I admire that. I know you're obviously a more of an expert in this area than I am, but being aware of your resilience and your stress level, to me, has got to be the starting point, isn't it?
Absolutely, and that's why we measure it. But one of the interesting things we can see in the data is we can see a very strong correlation between levels of resilience, performance, and well-being. And so what we can see in our data is that people with the highest levels of resilience are 9 times more likely to be in this sweet spot of optimal performance, which is high performance with acceptable levels of stress, than people with low levels of resilience.
Can you help somebody get more resilient?
Yes. The good news with resilience is it's not a case of he or she is or isn't. What we can do is understand where people are. We can identify the areas, as I said earlier, which are perhaps pulling their resilience down. And then through workshops, training, self-learning, we can help them become more resilient.
Well, I hope, I'm sure that resonates with people who are watching and listening to this. So, you've struck me as somebody who doesn't get stressed as well.
I am probably,
or did you hide
my
it well?
My colleagues would tell you that, Steve was always a very calm, even, in adversity, I remain calm. May not feel calm inside. And I'll give you a really funny analogy of this. My passion for football, and I think we mentioned my football team, Stoke.
I'm glad you're calling it football now, not soccer. You were calling it soccer.
Yeah,
earlier.
Sorry about that.
You were in the States for too long, weren't you?
Yeah, and my son's wife is American, so I'm tuning into
bilingual.
different. Yeah, I'm bilingual. But in those days when my team found their way into the Premier League, the team that hated coming to the Britannia Stadium, as it was then, was Arsenal. And what would happen is they'd come out on a sort of cold winter's evening with their gloves and their sort of stockings on, and they'd, let's say, receive a warm welcome. because the fans
warm
were
pottery's welcome.
part of it. But coming back to leadership and calmness, it would always fall apart for Arsenal when Arsene Wenger on the touchline was incredibly agitated, losing his cool, waving his arms around. And you could see the likes of Van Persie and other great players looking at him and saying, crikey, this is really bad. We are in trouble. And of the 9 visits they made during the time that I was the season ticket holder, I think we beat them 8 times and we lost once.
They probably lost on the way up the motorway thinking, bloody hell, Stoke.
Yeah.
Gee.
Now, to be fair to them, when we went down to the Emirates, it was, it looked more like a cricket score than a football score.
Yeah.
But no, happy times. That was one of my stress busters, going up and letting everything out on the football terraces.
Yeah, fantastic. Let's go back to leaving corporate and going into,
Yes.
What do you miss about it? Because I'm sure there must be something. I mean, I miss a bit, but what do you miss?
I miss being part of a team. In the business we have today, we have a small core team and we have a broader group of associates. So I miss being a team and a leader in that sense.
I was going to be a bit more specific. Do you miss being a leader of a team or being part of a team? Because I like being a leader of a team. I'm not sure I was a great team member, actually. I like running teams. I miss that a lot, actually.
Yeah, I miss that so much so that a couple of months out of the corporate world, I did go for 6 months and run a part of a European software house. Some of your listeners may remember Susan Bowen.
Oh, that's where I bumped into you again.
Exactly,
Do you remember?
yeah.
At a kickoff down in some lovely hotel in Hampshire somewhere.
Yeah, if you remember.
You went in and run that. You went to run it, didn't you, in Europe for a while?
I went to run it for 6 months, and essentially I remember all the reasons why I missed the corporate world, which is leading a team, etc. But then I kind of reflected on all the reasons that I really didn't want to go back there. So it kind of got it out of my system.
All that responsibility, all those people phoning you up.
Yeah, and all of the futility of, I don't know, apologies to listeners and viewers, but the futility of being on those forecast calls, etc. It just...
Yeah, somebody said to me once that once you get into your 50s, your sort of corporate tolerance threshold drops significantly. So the stuff you put up with all the way through your career up until your early 50s, even though you knew it was horrible, you just did it because you had a high pain threshold, high tolerance threshold. It drops significantly as you go through your 50s, and
I'd agree.
Yeah, and it's. I think it's a time of life thing, and maybe ambition gets channeled into different things when you get into your 50s. Some people might still be yearning to climb the corporate ladder in their late 50s. Most people, I think, channel their ambitions. Channel their ambitions elsewhere. About a sense of... Sorry, go on, Steve.
No, I was going to say, for people listening who may still be in the corporate world, who might be thinking about pivoting out into something different. We talked about the financial factors, but don't underestimate the experience that you've built up. Quite often we can, convince ourselves, well, everyone knows what I know. Well, the answer is they don't. Think about, what you've done in your career. Think about the value that you could bring to other people, other organizations. And think about, where you are in your life and the extent with which you can use that experience going forward and perhaps have a more balanced lifestyle. And I could quite easily still be in the corporate world. I wouldn't be as happy as I am now. I wouldn't be as fulfilled. I'd probably have more money in the bank, but how much?
But and I think that's a great message. We underestimate what we've accumulated in terms of wisdom and experience.
Exactly.
But you're still pretty busy, and I'm still pretty busy.
Yes.
I think it depends on the individual, isn't it? But what I would say is start thinking about what you're going to do post corporate while you're at corporate. Don't and something that I do. I've seen lots of evidence of this. How you leave the corporate world has a big impact on how you feel thereafter. So, I mean, I chose to leave HP on my terms.
Yeah,
you
absolutely.
did as well.
Yeah.
And then I ended up doing. I suppose I still went into a corporate world, but when I ended up leaving Telefonica Tech, it was on my terms.
Yes.
I think if you're bundled out, if you're fired, if you stay too long and you get shunted out, I think it can scar you. It can scar you because it hurts.
Yeah.
There's a hurt to pride, self-esteem, which can linger for a long time. So I don't give a huge amount of advice because it depends on the individual. But
exactly.
Try and choose your exit on your terms. Try and make it on your.
Great advice, Martin.
Do you think because it has a big effect on your psyche? And the other thing is, you don't always know what the road ahead is. I'm not sure you necessarily were looking to build Resilience Builder in your mid-50s. I thought I was gonna. I didn't think I was going to go on a journey with OCSL, Kencom, and Telefonica, which were probably 9 of the best years of my life. And
100%, Martin. And that's another sort of learning for me is that we all spent many years in our corporate world structured every minute, every second of the day. And when I came, and it didn't give you time to explore other ideas and thoughts.
The momentum was generated for you, wasn't it?
Exactly.
Is the way I look at it.
Often no choice. But when I came out of that world, it was scary that first Monday morning when no emails, nobody calls, etc. But it was so empowering because I could do anything I wanted. And the most incredible thing is sometimes when you drive, obviously things are going to happen, but you're surprised at what just happens naturally when perhaps you're least looking for.
Yeah, that liberating experience I can share. That meant a lot to me. I suppose one thing you've got to get used to as well is you're no longer Billy Big Bollocks.
No.
Whether you really are that status conscious or not, you nevertheless had a title, you had a sense of responsibility. You were, particularly if you got to senior positions, and then you leave it, and then you're Steve Howe and Martin Hess. I mean, for example, I do some training now. I do some leadership training, sales management training. I get marked at the end of every course out of 5. You can't show up as Martin Hess, X this, X that. They don't give a damn. It's Martin Hess doing that particular in the moment, doing that job.
Exactly.
And you have to stand on your own 2 feet and deliver value. And then when that's over, you haven't got the PA, the EA, looking after you, and all the
So I'm laughing because
I'm not bothered about it, but it is something you just need to take into account, isn't it?
Yeah, and I was laughing there when you said no EA, no PA, no support person, because as a kind of entrepreneur, you end up doing all of these things.
Yeah, and people
yourself.
thought I'd never cope with that.
No, exactly. Yeah,
and
I've it's amazing what you learn.
It's amazing what you learn. We could talk for hours.
I know.
Any other points you want to make? We haven't really touched. I mean, who are the great? Just rounding off, any great inspirers that you can think of? Any other take-home messages as well? Just want to make sure we don't leave anything on the table.
In terms of career, I guess HP leaders that inspired me. I'll have to be careful here because there were plenty of leaders who didn't. So we'll leave that at the door. But leaders that truly inspired me, the current CEO of HPE, Antonio Neri, came from very humble beginnings. And when I was running TS, he was globally responsible for TS. And he gave me huge amount of support when I needed help. And sometimes, we're not always comfortable asking for help, but when I asked, he was always there and always gave it. And if you look at his career projection, I think he started off on, in a call center, on a support desk, through to being CEO of HPE. Incredible story, incredible guy, but a very human guy.
Yeah,
he
lovely.
likes his football as
Does
well.
he? Well, Antonio Neri, if you're watching or listening, hey, great plug from Steve Howe.
And I guess, the message I would leave with people is quite often people, when they're on the career ladder, they fall into the trap of thinking it's either a successful career or a happy, healthy, and balanced life. It is possible to have a highly successful career without sacrificing either your health, your well-being, or personal relationships. And for me, it took me a little while to work that one out. But for anyone who's interested, who finds themselves in that sort of trap on the verge of stress, etc., and this is an advert, this is me offering my personal help, just reach out and we'll have a chat.
Go on, emails. Go on, what's the email? How do people reach out to you, Steve?
They can just type in Resilience Builder, all one word, or go onto my LinkedIn or drop me an email on steve.howe@resiliencebuilder.co.uk. Because today it's more about helping people. It's not about building an empire.
Yeah, and I think you're a great advert for how fulfilling life can be after corporate.
Thank you.
You're leading a very, very full life. You're building a really nice business that's got some huge social value, and you're doing some crazy stuff for a guy in his 60s, which puts me to shame.
But as they say, don't say that, Martin, because if you look at what you've done, your career, where you're going now,
Well, I don't want to stop. To me, it's a glide path. At some point, the glider will touch the ground, won't it? I mean, but I don't think of retirement. I think of probably just mixing it up a bit, doing less, working less hard, frankly, on stuff, having more free time to fulfill my own passions. And at some stage, you'll get to a point where it's less work and more hobbies.
Yeah.
I feel very, very comfortable with that trajectory. And you probably do the same, don't you?
I feel totally calm, relaxed. And that's for real. There's nothing going on inside. No.
And we're not thinking, crikey, we got that forecast call in an hour. Better get on top of those numbers.
No.
That's nice, isn't it?
Perfect.
On that note, let's sign off. Thank you, everybody, for watching and listening. Thank you very, very much, Steve. Really enjoyed it. Been very, very interesting.
And thank you for having me on, Martin. Really interesting conversation. Thank you.